This video, or this series, will cover what exactly framework debate is. As a lesson preview, this lesson will cover first what framework debate is, and second, offense under a framework. So what exactly is framework debate? Framework is a philosophical or ethical lens that you are taking in round, and essentially it's a lens that you are going to see which arguments or which impacts are going to matter. Now, the first part of framework is also known as the value. Now, the value is contextualized by the resolution of the topic. For example, if the resolution of the topic is resolve the People's Republic of China ought to prioritize environmental protection over economic growth, the word ought would imply that there is a moral obligation. And so, ought would mean that you would go under a value of morality. However, sometimes the word ought isn't in the resolution, but sometimes replaced with just. In that case, you would just use the value of justice. And so, as a rule of thumb, when you're choosing or deciding on which value you should always use one that is contextualized or one is directly denoted by the resolution, or else it's very hard for you to defend any other value when it's not contextualized by the resolution. The second part of your framework is also known as the value criterion. Now, the value criterion is how we should seek your value. For example, if you have a value of morality, then you would want something to uphold morality. And the most common examples of upholding morality is maximizing well-being, or in other cases, preserving rights. A lot of these value criterions are essentially actions that you should take and actions that are essentially filtered by your value and things that your value sees as the most valuable in the round. And so again, your framework filters which arguments should be upheld in the round. If you win your framework, that means that only the arguments that filter through your framework are going to be arguments that the judge is going to buy. For example, if you have a value of morality and your value criterion is maximizing well-being, and your opponent starts talking about how we should preserve rights, even though you clearly won the framework debate, that means that their arguments doesn't really matter because framework serves as a meta-analysis of which arguments should be filtered through in the round. So now let's talk about how to generate offense under a framework. As a reminder, offense is reasons why you should be preferred or win. An offense under a framework would mean that you should have reasons why you should be preferred or win under your framework. These pieces of offense are also known as contentions. And some examples of contentions are the follows. The first one is libertarian offense. If you have a libertarian framework that talks about how we should preserve rights, then your piece of offense would have, or most likely be, a piece of evidence saying why a governmental project violates rights through taxes. Libertarianism is usually ruled on the negative if the affirmative calls for a policy action. In order for you to pass a policy action, you need to pass taxes. But the very framework of libertarianism says that the very idea of passing taxes violates people's rights, and that in and of itself is bad. This is one example of libertarian offense, and this is a reason why you should win under libertarianism. The second example is utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is one of the most common frameworks that you could have. Util says that you should maximize the amount of happiness and minimize the most amount of pain. And so util offense would prove why the very aspect of not doing your side is going to cause a lot of death, which under util is bad. Okay, so let's go into the sample framework that you could have in a debate round. So if the topic is resolved, the appropriation of outer space by private entities is unjust, then you would automatically see the word unjust and say that your value is justice. Now, the value criterion is up for debate. You can do whatever you want, but I chose the value criterion of the Rawls theory of justice as fairness. And so the Wenner evidence says that the first condition of justice is liberty, and that the very idea of justice is to give everyone equality of opportunity and also the greatest benefit of the least advantaged members of society. And so along the lines of what I was saying about what Rawls' offense was in the previous slide, this piece of evidence would say that the very idea of justice would mean posing or upholding equality. And so this is basically a clarification of what Rawls' theory of justice actually says. Now, the contention, or the Wretch evidence, says that the very idea of the topic being unjust, or the appropriation of outer space being unjust, is due to only a certain amount of people being able to get benefited from the appropriation of outer space. And since the affirmative is arguing for why the appropriation of outer space by private entities is unjust, this contention needs to prove why the very idea of appropriating outer space by private corporations is unjust because it only benefits some people. And so this is an example of a contention in a real-life debate, because this piece of evidence proves why affirming the resolution is just under Rawls' theory of justice as fairness. That is the end of our video, and I hope you learned a lot about what framework debate is, how to use framework in a debate round, and the different parts of framework, including the offense under your framework.